Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the How Did You Learn to Do That podcast. Thank you so much for tuning back this week for another amazing episode. I hope that you've enjoyed our episode so far. And if you have, I would love if you could please go onto Apple Podcasts and leave us a review and help us grow and share our story with many more people around the world. And with that, if you could like, subscribe, and share our podcast with your family and your friends. We're also on YouTube, all major podcast platforms, as well as on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and Pinterest. So we're all over the place, and we would love to see the support and to meet many of you. As you've shared, we have workshops coming up. We have a course coming up. If you want to be the first to know and the first to grab your spot, make sure you sign up onto our newsletter list so that you can get access to that and to much more content. All right, so today we have an amazing person who I've admired, and I've been following her journey over the last several years. Her name is Izabela, and she is well known as the Cake Mama on Instagram, and she does vegan desserts and amazing cookies, and her decor on these cookies is amazing. It's incredible, and if you actually look at it, they're just so good, and they look so pretty that you don't even want to eat it. But she's an inspiration to, I know, many of you and many people around. And so I would love for you to show her some love and support by following her at the.cake.mama on Instagram and show her some love. And I can't wait for you guys to hear her story because she's so inspirational, and she did a big move last year, and she's living her life and living the life that she wanted to have for herself and created that for herself. So I'm excited to have her on and for her to share her story with all of you. So stay tuned. Hi, everyone. I'd like to welcome Izabela, who you may know as the Cake Mama on Instagram. So Izabela is a self-taught baker, a content creator, and a mom to 3 children. She began baking after the birth of her first child in 2006 and started baking cakes and cookies for her friends and family members. Fast forward to 2020, Izabela has expanded her business to not only create beautiful vegan desserts, but she has taught countless workshops on how to decorate cookies, written recipes to share on her blog, and worked with brands as a digital influencer. So I'd like to welcome Izabela to the podcast, and thank you for joining me and sharing your story today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
I'm so excited to have you on because when I started this, actually, I had a list of people I would love to have on the podcast, and you were one of those people. So when you accepted, I was like, yay! I was so excited, and I followed your journey over the last several years, and I'm totally inspired by you and the fact that you have moved to the Okanagan, which is a dream of mine to do. And my husband and I have always thought about what if we could ever do that. And when you did it, I was like, oh my gosh, someone did it. They just moved, and so it's a total inspiration to me. So I really appreciate you being here today. Yeah. So we can just start. I'd like to ask you, how did you, begin to think that you wanted to start baking cookies and cakes and start that as a business? What drove you to that, and what inspired you to continue onto that journey?
Honestly, it's a kind of it's a bit of a funny story because this was never this was never the thing that I thought I would be doing in my wildest dreams. Honestly, I thought I was going to grow up to be a teacher. I thought I was going to further my career in the healthcare industry, which is what I did right after high school. I actually felt a little lost, which I'm sure a lot of people do after high school. What do I want to be? I didn't really have a hard, solid direction. And I was like, healthcare is really good. There's kind of an industry that probably will never be short of work. And so that was my mindset at 19. I was like, you know what? I need to do something that's going to keep me busy all the time. So I went into pharmacy, and it was actually literally a friend of mine who was like, hey, I'm baking a cake for my cousin's wedding, and it's going to be really big. We're basically replicating this 80s style, tiered, one of those buttercream with the ladder and the stairs and all this kind of stuff. And I was like, sure. I'm like, I baked before. I baked with my mom, my grandma, my sister. My sister and I spent many summers when my parents were at work and we were younger at home, and we would just be like, okay, let's open up a cookbook and start baking. Like we made scones. Like that was like the thing we did all the time. It's just like really hilarious. But it was never really like, wow, I have like such a passion for this. But on the other side of that, like once I started doing that, I was like, you know what, maybe I could go to culinary school. Like maybe that is my calling. I really enjoy that. But I got a lot of kickback from not necessarily my like not my immediate family, but like my grandparents were kind of like, you don't want to work in a restaurant. It's just long hours. And it's so funny because as an entrepreneur, like there's no such thing as 9 to 5. Like I'm sure
No.
you can understand that. Like that doesn't exist, right? So anyway, so I followed this path of healthcare and worked in pharmacy and did that for a number of years. And then I started just kind of, like that friend of mine who was like, hey, make this cake for me. I was like, okay, this is fun. And then my sister's wedding came up, and then it was like I did my sister's wedding cake, and like it just became this thing that we did, my friend and I, for a couple of years. And then she became really busy with her own career and her life path. And so then I was kind of stuck in this position where I was like, well, I really enjoy baking, but I didn't really know what that looked like. So really for the longest time, it actually just, it was actually just baking for family and friends and through word of mouth. And like back in 2006, which doesn't seem that long ago, social media wasn't what it was back then. Like it literally was word of mouth, right? So that's basically how it started, was like, oh, a friend of a friend was like, hey, I heard you make cakes. Oh yeah, hey, that's the cake mama. That's the mama that always makes cakes. Like, and at the time I really took it, when I really took it more seriously was when I was on my maternity leave with my eldest, who's now going on 14, which is like mind blowing to me right now. But yeah, I basically took that year when I was home with her to kind of just sort of really reevaluate what I wanted to do. But it didn't, it didn't make sense at that time, because it was like, we were kind of like, my husband and I had different life goals, and we really wanted to achieve that, and to kind of like take a step back financially, if you will. To just do cakes on the side was really not a feasible thing. So that's basically what it started as, was just, I worked my full-time job, and after work, my 5 to 9 or 10, 11, 12 to 4 in the morning would be baking cakes for people. And yeah, and then basically it just got to a point where, as the business grew and as social media kind of came into play and I was able to kind of advertise myself a bit more, it got to the point where my day job was sort of impeding on the opportunities I had for my side gig, if you will. So that was kind of like when I decided to make that jump. But essentially that's sort of the beginning journey of how the Cake Mama came to be. It was just this like idea that was like I said, I didn't know I liked to bake as much as I clearly do. But I'm always the type of person who is a learner. Like, I think I'm just a lifelong learner. I'm just like, oh, how do you do that? And I'm the person, to a fault maybe sometimes, that's like, I'll do it. I'll just learn how to do it. If I'm going to, I want to know how to knit. How do you knit? Okay, I'm going to learn how to do that. How do I set up a website? Sure, I'll learn how to do that. Like, I could hire someone to do that, but I'm going to learn how to do that. And so it's just this ongoing thing. And so then the cakes just kind of snowballed into, well, I want to learn how to make sugar cookies, because sugar cookies are kind of a thing that people like for birthdays and as a add-on. So I started playing around with that. And then it's like, well, people really like macarons now. Like, that's the thing, So I started, playing around with macaron recipes and figuring out which one worked for me. So it was just this like, always this like thirst to learn more. And that's just kind of like what projected me into this sort of path, if you will. But yeah, it never began as like, I'm going to be a baker when I grow up. It was like that was like never ever the mindset, which is crazy.
What I love most about your story is that, if someone's on your Instagram and they see the success that you've had, they don't realize that you've put 14 years of hard work into it. And, and it's a good reminder that good things, they take time and patience and a lot of effort and hard work. And I love that you shared that. And I'm just curious, like, when you made that jump from moving from your career and your job into this new career and becoming an entrepreneur, how did that feel? What were the thoughts that were actually going through your head when you were trying to decide whether you should make that jump? And then How did you actually find the courage to do that? Because I know a lot of people struggle with that.
Absolutely. So I was fortunate to be in a position, and I mean, I know this is going to look so different for a lot of different people, but I was fortunate to be in a position where I had the ability to step down from a permanent position, like a permanent full time position, into a casual position. So I was working at the hospital at the time, and so, but no, but then also knowing that there was still quite a bit of job security in terms of being a casual. Like I knew that in my state of where I worked that there was a high demand for employees, so I knew that I could pick and choose what hours I wanted to work, which is not always the case for everyone, but that definitely worked in my favor. But even prior to that, um, I was always I always did the unfavorable hours. So I was already used to working, because being a mom and having kids that were not quite yet school age and having a husband that worked a day job, the natural thought process was like, well, I guess I'll just work evenings because that just makes the most sense for our family life. It means that I get to raise my kids, but then also, work at the same time. So I was already used to working night shifts. Like I was working 4 to midnight or 6 to 2 a.m. And to be home for the kids, but in those hours I would be brainstorming ideas or taking on small orders here and there, just to kind of keep my foot in that door. And then when it got to the point where I was like, okay, you know what, like the biggest hang up was, at the time when I decided that I needed to put more focus into this business, was when I started getting denied for time off, which is of course like everybody's, when you work a 9 to 5 job, you got to request time off.
Yeah.
And most things happen. And I was also working weekends too. So like my what my week looked like was I was working Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sundays, and they were all like 4 to midnight. So it's like I missed out on family dinners. I missed out on get-togethers because there's always that like work looming in your head kind of thing. And so essentially I just, I'd request, because, I would start participating in farmers markets and like doing little pop-ups here and there. And when do those happen? They happen on the weekends. And so it got to the point where I knew I could calculate, based on previous experiences, how well I would do at a market compared to what I would make in a day. And it was kind of like, now it's not making sense, right? I mean, not to say that like it doesn't take work to get, I guess I should say, rephrase that to saying, how much would I make in a week selling at a market versus how much would I make in a week working my day job?
Yeah.
And it got to the point where it was like, well, this isn't making sense. I'm making less working at my day job than I would be working at my side job. Although the work is different, it's not just this job where you just punch in and punch out. There's a lot of, as an entrepreneur, you wear many different hats, but if you're passionate enough about it, you don't care. That's what you want to do, right? So it got to the point where I was like, well, you know what? Like, I feel like I just really need to step down from this position because it's not working for me. And I was terrified. I was absolutely terrified. I was just like, now, because it's like, it's easy to have that safety net, right? Because it's like, oh, well, if I don't feel like working that hard, I can always fall back to my 9 to 5 job. It's there. I'll get a paycheck every 2 weeks. And then the other side of that is like, well, no, I am my paycheck every 2 weeks. If I want money, I have to work, right? And I have to work at it. And so, it was terrifying. Like, no word of lie. It was very terrifying. However, I knew what I needed to do. And I knew the level of like passion and drive that I had to be able to make it happen. So then it didn't seem as daunting. And truly, like that's, as the saying goes, leap and the net will appear. It's true, because if you are passionate enough about what you do and the work that you're doing, whatever that might look like, is solid for you, like the numbers work for you, then there's no reason why you can't do it. You just have to do it. And then, you know what, when the net's not there to save you, you just need to make sure that you are continuously working and figuring out ways to make this all work, all the time. And it gets easier as the time goes on.
Yeah, yeah. I love that you said that you just take the leap and the net will show up. And I think that's so true, and just even in myself, starting the podcast, I was just like, who's going to want to appear on my podcast? And I just started, I did the leap. I started putting out questions and messaging people. And now I just feel like so blessed that, there is this group of people and this community of people that do want to be on the podcast and, share their stories and engage. And I think that, before I started the podcast, I didn't know that. But now it's, there are people that want to talk about their stories, their journeys, their experiences, and how they're start living this journey, trying to find their purpose in life or finding what makes them happy in life. So, I totally resonate with what you said about take the leap and the net will find you. It's so true.
You just
And
have.
so what would you say, and now that you have made that leap and you've, as I mentioned before, you and your family have moved from the Lower Mainland to the Okanagan, what has been the biggest change in your life, and how has being an entrepreneur actually changed your life?
I would have to say that I look at things a little bit differently being an entrepreneur. I appreciate a lot more in many different like avenues of life. It's not necessarily just appreciating other fellow business owners or entrepreneurs, although I love them all so much, and I love building like creating that community support and building that with people who are in business, whether it be baking in the baking realm. I'm definitely somebody who is like 10 out of 10 10 out of 10 out there, answering questions and getting people, to the best of my knowledge and capabilities, answering questions and supporting people, but also people in that in other businesses. I want to see everybody succeed because that's like, I get how hard it is. But on the flip side of that, I also just appreciate, I just appreciate the time that I have now. Although there are lots of days where the days bleed into one another just because it is really busy, and there really is kind of like a hard way. It's really difficult to turn the brain off when it comes to being an entrepreneur. But I don't know. I certainly appreciate, like seeing the level of input and efforts that are in other businesses. I want to support them, and then just like saying with the move, like for myself, it's like realizing that just because you have a solid foundation growing your business in a city, because I was in Langley prior to this, growing your business in a city, that you can't assume that everything that or have done is going to translate well to a new city. It's literally hitting the reset button. It's starting all over, and that can be super daunting. It has been super daunting, but you know what? It's definitely a humbling experience because it helps me, get back to the basics and figuring out, how I can serve this community here now that I'm here, but also, being there for my strong community, which is out in the Lower Mainland. Like, people are like super supportive, and sad that I'm no longer there, but it's also just trying to be like resourceful and be supportive. And I think that's definitely what has changed in terms of, like, I feel like you just view the world differently when you just work, a 9 to 5 job versus, there's just an appreciation for a lot of different things, whether it just be like being out there or like spending quality time with your family. You cherish that for sure. There's also just that inner drive that you appreciate, that doesn't exist in people who don't do what you do. And I think it's definitely just seeing the world in a different light because I think the back end of it all, if that makes sense. I think that's what's
Yeah.
definitely done for me is I know what it takes, or what the steps have had to be made in order to get somebody to the point where we're seeing what we're seeing out of them,
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, the sweat equity is probably what you're referring to. It's
Yes, exactly.
how much equity you've put into every part of your business. And I say that when you work a 9 to 5, there's a structure that's there for you. There's a desk, there's, a chair if you're an office worker, and you show up and everything's set up, and then you just bring your brain
That's
and
right.
your body and you do the work. But being an entrepreneur, you have to create that structure so that you have a place for your body and your brain to do work, or a way to do it.
Absolutely.
So yeah, it's definitely, I resonate with you in the sweat equity, because every step of the way, you have to, like you said, you have to wear many hats. You have to learn to be an accountant. You have to learn to be a marketer. You have to learn to be a content creator, an expert in the field. And for yourself, you have to, be a baker and learn what's going on currently in the industry and keep your finger on the pulse and all of that. So, yeah, I think that that's amazing. And so, um, I think you shared earlier about how you had to work with your family to schedule your time. So your husband would work during the day and you would work in the evenings. So how has that been? How have you actually been able to balance that schedule and that life with raising three children and having your husband and making time for your children and your husband and your family, but also for yourself to do things that make you happy and to take care of yourself? How do you do that balance? How do you manage?
Well, I definitely think that that's always going to be a lifelong journey of figuring that out. Because there's really no, I think I would be, I know I would be lying if I said that I had like this perfect schedule and this perfect plan, because I 100% don't. And I feel it's important to be transparent in that sense, because I think that like we all want that. We all want that stability. We all want that balance, but sometimes it just doesn't really exist. And there are a lot of sacrifices that need to be made in order to, like, there's just a really, I'm going to call it ugly. Let's just call it the ugly side of being an entrepreneur. Like sometimes you're trying to balance things and you want to tear your hair out because you've got this new baby in your life, right? Which is your business. And then there's like the family, like the real life people that are obviously there to support you. But what I will say to that is, I especially over this COVID period, have really just taken a time to reflect on what matters to me, what makes, like, how do I prioritize myself? And it's nothing glamorous. Like, for me, I definitely I go for a walk every morning, almost every morning. I make sure that I get up at a decent time, because I feel like I said, with COVID, it feels like these days can just bleed into the next day. And it's like, oh man, it's 10 o'clock already. Gee, like I didn't even realize it was that late in the morning already. Cause it's all a blur. Right. So I try to create this structure that's like, okay, get up at 7, be out the door by 7:30, go for your half an hour to 45-minute walk, depending on how you're feeling. I really try to like listen to myself, because I always used to have this like maybe an unrealistic expectation of like the things I should be doing. Like this is what people do. They like, sit and have a coffee and read a book, and they like go exercise or they do yoga. And I'm like, trying to be that person. And I'm just realizing, you know what, it's okay to not be that person too, and just kind of figure out what works for you. Right. So for me, it's definitely, trying to get that. So I try to do that before I know my kids get up, because my kids are usually up around 8 or 8:30 during this summer COVID thing. So I try to get home before that. And then the kids are breakfasted. My husband's already working downstairs in his office. And so I feel very, very blessed that I have, 2 older children. My eldest is 13, my middle one is 10, and then I've got my son who's 4. So they have kind of like figured out ways to entertain each other. My eldest Emma is really good at, facilitating activities. So as long as I've kind of checked in with them and know what's going on, then by like 10 o'clock is like kind of when I turn on my, my baking hat, and I start baking during the day. What I used to do was I used to do all the daytime things, and I start baking after dinner. And then, there is no balance there. It's ridiculous. It's like, you spend a whole entire day, doing all the homely domestic things. And then you start working, which, I'm not, like I said earlier, it's not like I'm unused to that, because I used to obviously work evenings. So that's very, second nature to me almost. But then it's like, then when do you hit the like clock to tell you, or the timer that says, okay, it's time to turn things off and go to bed? It like doesn't exist. You'll just keep going and going and going. Like, oh, if I had, I'll just get this one more thing done, or I'll ice this one more cookie, or I'll, make some extra buttercream, or whatever it is. And it just never ends. So now it's like, I try to make it so that I start at 10 a.m. and I finish by the time it's, dinner-ish, or a little bit after dinner. But, it's kind of this messy thing where it's like, okay, well, I got to pause because I got to go upstairs and, prepare lunch if the kids haven't figured out lunch on their own. And then I don't, so that's kind of like my Monday to Friday routine. I try to make it so that my husband and I get time in the evening to hang out, and then I'm not just back in the kitchen again. It really depends on if there's like a really large order, or like how I've decided to like take on a specific order, but that's kind of like the general thing. And then weekends are like, a hard and fast rule that I don't work on weekends. So that means like I don't reply to any emails on the weekends. Usually orders are due for like Saturday or Sunday, so it's fine like if people are just coming to pick them up. But the goal is to always be done by Friday, and then the weekend is just family time. Because everything just used to bleed into one another, and I didn't have any boundaries set in that way. And then I just was burnt out, and it was just not a healthy, obviously then it's like, okay, well, oh, I haven't even had breakfast yet, or, oh, I haven't had dinner yet, or like, oh, it's just, it turns into this thing where it's just like you're working and working and working, and you like take zero care of yourself. And I'm understanding as I get older that I'm not as resilient as I used to be, and I don't bounce back the same way I used to when I was in my 20s. So it's really just kind of listening to myself and being like, okay, don't be silly. Like really just, it doesn't have, if you don't feel like going for a walk, then don't. It's fine. Like nobody's going to like be mad at you for that, right? Or like don't be mad at yourself for not doing that, but just have those positive affirmations in your voice, or that voice in your head just saying how good you feel when you're done, so just go and do it. And I try to make it like enjoyable. I don't Where I live, it's very, very hilly. So I have I have a route that I take that is like somewhat hilly, but not to the point where I'm like, I hate myself for going down this road. So I try to just be gentle in that way, but make sure that I am moving my body outside of the baking realm, because baking can be busy. Like I'm usually running around a lot, getting stuff out of ovens and like decorating stuff at the same time. So I'm trying to be like multitasking in that sense. So really just kind of like breaking that down, and then just kind of trusting that like I don't always have to be watching my kids 24/7, that I can trust my older kids to kind of take on the reins there and be responsible and give them that responsibility. And so far it's been kind of working. So I'm, that's kind of what it's looking like right now. Who knows what it's going to look like come the fall, but I feel good that way. It makes me feel good knowing that I'm carving out that little bit of time for myself. It's not huge, but for me, it's enough. It's enough that says, hey, you know what? You did something just for you that feels good for you, that has your body moving, have you thinking. And actually that's usually when I listen to podcasts, is when I go for my walk. So now I'm going to start listening to your podcast, because I realize that there's a whole bunch of good ones that I am like super interested in. So that's awesome. But that's kind of what I do, is that's like my time where I like listen, and I either reflect, or I listen to a podcast that's inspiring. And yeah, that's kind of how things work around here.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I've been talking to many people about this, and it feels like the consensus is when you're a parent, you have to figure out when your kids wake up, and you need to wake up before them in order to get that time to yourself. And, for myself and my husband, we've realized that recently too, that after my daughter's 7:30 bedtime, we can't do anything that's just for us, other than just lay on the couch and do nothing. 'Cause we're so tired from the day, and running after a toddler, it's exhausting. But trying to get up in the morning and make it a bit slower and make that time for yourself. And I appreciate what you said about, sticking to a strict schedule of not working on the weekends, or trying to stick to a schedule during the day. And I find that I create these schedules that say that I'm going to work from this time to this time, and then I'm going to stop. But and as you mentioned, when you love something that you do, then you're just like, okay, I'm going to keep doing this because I'm really enjoying it, or I'll keep doing this, or maybe I'll get to that. And next thing you know, you're working all day, all night, and then burnout hits, and then you kind of are like, well, where did this come from? I don't even know why I feel burnt out. And it's, most of the time it's because you are working those days. And I know for myself now, I've also instilled the no weekends rule, because before I would think, oh, wow, the weekends, I have an entire day to do work, and now I'm like, okay, no, I need the entire day to relax and spend time with my family, my friends, and connect with people, and, make that priority, because that keeps me going in my self-care. So I know you talked about what you do to take care of yourself throughout the day, but when there are challenges or setbacks or difficulties, or things that you're uncertain and you're not really sure how you'll move forward, and COVID is a great example as well of how a lot of people have had to pivot their businesses and their brands. So how do you take care of yourself in that moment? How do you self-reflect? How do you get yourself back into a positive mindset? And motivate yourself to keep going and to move forward?
I would definitely have to say, because that this is a very like recent experience. And I mean, it happens a lot, but like I feel like you mentioned with COVID, it's just I mentioned in my stories actually on Monday, I was like, I'm really feeling the COVID feels like lately. And I I was last week, I was baking because I had a really busy baking week, and I'm literally rolling out cookies and I'm like starting to cry. Like I'm literally starting to cry. And I'm thinking to myself, like, it, there's just, the orders are coming in, which is great, no complaints. But there's always like, as a business, there's always like, what's the next thing? What's the next thing? Is it a product? Is it a service? Is it um, a blog series? Like there's just all these like different facets of my business, right? So it's kind of like always having that in my head. And obviously things have changed and things have slowed down since COVID because people aren't having parties and you know, and there's just a lot of different things happening with that. So I'm like literally in tears, and I'm like pouring my heart out to my husband, and he's just listening to me, and I'm just feeling, I was just really at a point where I was just like, what is this all for? Like, I had such, and I'm sure everybody can relate to this. They had 2020 was going to be their year. It was like 2019 was awesome. I learned so much from it. 20, now with that experience that I've gained, I'm totally going to apply it to 2020, and I'm going to see it grow. Like and then I think that's kind of everybody's yearly, routine, if you will. Mm-hmm. And so so I'm pouring my heart out to my husband, and he's definitely my rock. And he just listened. He's just like, you know what? He's like, you just need to write this down. All the things that you want to do, you just have to write it all down. And then from there, like figure out what your challenges are within each category, if you will, and what are the ways to overcome them. Just literally breaking them down to the bare bones of it, because it always seems so much more overwhelming when you look at it in the big picture sense, right? So to say, how do I shift my focus or, maintain positivity or regain that motivation? Because I literally was in a state of last week going like that is it. This is like, I'm not done, but like, I was just like, I don't know where this is going. So it was definitely, that has definitely helped me, sitting down and writing down, okay, you know what? Like if one of the things I want to put out in this universe is I want to write a baking book. That's something that has been, as an example, like one of the things in my head. So it's like, okay, well, what do I need? What are the things I need to do in order to achieve that? And then, what would I put in a cookbook if I was going to have one? Like, what are the things that I would do? And it was like literally just writing all of those things down. And suddenly it reignited that passion that I've always had, but, that kind of got dimmed or like not snuffed out completely, but kind of dulled a little bit and kind of like made you feel, you're just kind of in this little lull, if you will. And suddenly writing those things down just kind of like, like, and then I could do this after that. And then I could do this after that. And it's like, okay, well, with these ideas, I really just need to plan it out, right? Like that's all we can do. And that's all we really have control over is what we do in these situations. We can't wait for other people to tell us these things. We can't wait for, other like businesses or brands or whatever it is in the capacity of what you do. You can't wait for people to come to you and say, hey, we have a proposition for you. It doesn't, you have control over how you dictate your life, despite what anybody might say to you or how people criticize or influence you or judge you or whatever it is, you have the control. So for me, writing things down, and doesn't have to be a hard plan. Doesn't have to be like, okay, Monday morning at 10 a.m., this is what I'm doing. It's more just like, okay, let's just break down these ideas into more tangible, like further tangible ideas. And then it really ignites that passion. And then all of a sudden I'm like, you know what? I'm not worried about what anybody else is doing. I'm just going to, I look at all these things that I have in front of me that I can do and that I have control over and that I can change or even just put out into the universe because I want to, not even because somebody's asking or I'm guessing what people want. It's like, you know what, I'm going to do what makes me feel good. And while those things might not necessarily bring revenue in right away, it's more just kind of like, okay, now my new normal is I have these custom orders that come through and obviously that's generating income. And then these ideas will grow into things that can generate income, but you just have to like plan it out. So I guess what I would say to that with my long-winded answer is how I pivot and shift my thinking and mindset into a positive state when there is something negative going on is to talk it out to somebody who will just listen, and then write it all down. That's my those are my two things.
Yeah, I think that's so true. Writing it down and going back to your why, why did you start this, or what is your reason for doing this? What is your inspiration? And yeah, and writing down actually what you want, and then creating small little action items, like you said, so you can keep chipping away at it and working towards your goals is so key. And I always say that you're the only one that's in control of your own life, and nobody else is. So you can't expect anybody else to make you happy, or to create a job for you, or to build your business for you, or do anything. It's all within you, and you have to do it. And the biggest thing I actually am learning right now is that once you do get started, you see all these other people that are doing things similar to what you want to do, and they have this or they have that, or they're doing this or they're offering this or that, and you can get caught up in that tunnel of, okay, I need to do that too, or I need to do all this. And I've had to recently just go back, and I actually wrote, because I come from a corporate background, I actually wrote a strategic plan for my podcast. And so I went back to my strategic plan,
It's
and
amazing.
I said, okay, if I offer these services, where does it tackle one of these goals I've set for myself? And it didn't. And that really helped me realign myself and realize, okay, those are the things that, other people want to offer, and that's amazing. And I'm happy for them, but that's not going to work for my business and the way I want to go. And at least the goals that I've set for myself at this time, because it gets overwhelming, and it gets overwhelming if you want to kind of keep doing everything. Um,
I totally agree with you on that. And just to kind of touch on you saying, like, when you look at people in your industry and you see what people are doing, you're kind of going, well, like, how come I didn't get asked to do that? Or how come, like, how come they got to do that and I didn't? And that's a very real thing. And I think people don't, or people just assume that, you know, when people have been in business for so long that they don't worry about people who do other things or do things that you do or do similar things that you do. And that's just not true. But the reality is just like you say, well, how does it serve you? And that's basically what I think to myself is like, okay, initially I'm feeling, I honor how I'm feeling. And then I go, well, like, does this pertain to me? Like, would I actually, let's say somebody got a brand partnership and I'm like, well, I could have done that. And then I think, well, wait a minute, does it align with my core values? Does it, is it a product I would even use? Like, things like that. And you kind of go, okay, well, no. So then I'm good. Like, I'm good.
yeah,
But it really takes that moment to just kind of like you said, refer back to, who you are, what you do. Or I see people offering different services, like within the baking realm. And I'm like, well, hey, I should do that. And then I go, well, wait a minute. Like, could I really do that? Like, how well could I execute that? Would it go the way that I would expect it to? And if the answer to that is no, then it's like, okay, well then just, what, be happy that somebody else is doing it and people are
yeah,
loving it. And send them that in that direction, right? Because really, and I know people always say community over competition. That's always easier said than done. I think that's just the reality. We all want that. We really do. But your emotions do get in the way sometimes, and you just kind of have to take a step back and go, okay, well, I know who I am as a person. I know how supportive I want to be for people. So let me just process that, and then realize that this is not something that it's not in the cards for me, and kind of shift your focus back into the things that you want to do, and the path that you've been wanting to take. And sometimes that path goes in different directions. Like, I'm sure you can relate to that. Like, you think it's going in this direction. Of course, we've all had to pivot with everything else going on in the world, but as long as it goes back to those core values and like the things that you stand for and the things that you want to put out in the world, and whether or not it's when people look at that and they go, well, that's not something that I would expect her to do, or like it's something totally out of left field. Like, you obviously just need to stay true to who you are as a person, and obviously that just kind of shines through in your brand. And that's something that I've always tried to put out there, is that what you see is what you get. This is who I am. If you were to see me in real life, this is who I would be. Like, there is no two sides of it. It's just, this is who I am. This, authenticity is key for me. And everything else just kind of falls into place when you know your core values and the direction that you're heading in.
Yeah. And and I think maybe I was a bit naive in this sense, but when I was listening to podcasts last year, a couple people that were on the podcast stuff, the big people like Jay Shetty or Rachel Hollis or whatnot, they made a mention, they mentioned that, oh, when I met you, you were exactly who you are online. And in my head, I was like, well, isn't that, I mean, how can you be two different people? You're only one person. Like, and I didn't understand it. And then I started hearing it again and again. And then I started talking to some people, and they're like, yeah, some people that present online are not actually like that in person. You might see a completely outgoing, extroverted, community builder, but when you meet the person in person, they're very introverted and not very social. And to me, that was a surprise because I didn't know that was a thing. So I could actually say now to you that who you are online is who you are here. And I don't, yeah, there's no difference at all. And I think that that's amazing that you're so authentic and genuine, and you are who you are. And my mom always says, I am who I am, and you accept it or you don't. And so that's her
So true.
signature line.
So true. It's so true. And I mean, I respect those who um, are a bit more introverted in real life, because I know that being behind a screen can sometimes be a completely different experience. Obviously, you're not in front of a crowd, you're not in front of people, so you have a different way of processing that, right? But it is interesting when you meet people and they're not who they are. You're just like, wow, this is not who I was expecting you to be. Thought you were going to be a little bit more social, but and it's funny because I always say that to my husband. He's like, it's very strange when people on social media are not as social as they are on social media, right? Because that's the whole premise of it, right? But I mean, yeah, authenticity is key always, right? I mean, and that obviously presents in different ways. People definitely might be a bit more closed or a bit more reserved in real life, but this is just who I am. It's just
Yeah.
I am very just outgoing.
Well, yeah, it's amazing. And just to go back onto what you said about the feelings you have sometimes when other people are doing certain things, and then you have to go back and check with yourself. I always think of Eckhart Tolle's comment about the ego, and he always says that you have to treat your ego as a separate entity to you, and sometimes that your ego and yourself are not the same. They're two different things. And he always says that the first time you see something or you hear something, it's your ego reacting.
Mm,
And some people think that their ego is themselves, so then they counter react in that way, and it's never a positive experience. But having the ability and the skill to take your ego, to check it, to put it aside, and then really understand your own feelings and seeing if it really impacts you.
totally.
I always go back to that because I always do that myself. I'm like, is this my ego? Where, I feel like I should be able to do this or do this, or, am I really actually interested in providing a service that's similar, or doing, revisiting some part of my business or myself as a person or whatnot. And most of the time, actually, I'll say 99% of the time, it's the ego. And then I realized that it's not,
Mhm.
has nothing to do with me as a person. It's just this thing that's a part of me that got in the way, and I had to check it.
Mhm.
And then I'm able to realign and get myself back to a place where I can be positive and continue on the journey. But I think that, yeah, I think and as you can resonate, it's a long term journey being an entrepreneur, and it doesn't happen overnight. It's a lot of hard work. And I'm sure in your 14 years, you've seen all kinds of trends and people and all kinds of things come across you. And what, sometimes you have to be strategic, and you have to think critically about what you want to do and what you want to present yourself as, and what's best for you and your business and your family.
It's so true because I mean, especially in my industry, there's so many different types of bakers, and there's a lot of different passions. When I started baking, I was all about baking cakes with fondant. So that's like that smooth, like rolled on icing that you like sits on top of it. Making little figurines out of like gum paste and sugar dough and things like that. And I thought I loved that, but the real reason why I did that was because I was afraid, because I wasn't because I was self-taught. Um, I didn't know how to properly smooth a cake, like a buttercream cake. And so I just always thought my cakes looked super messy. So my default was like, well, I'll just cover it in fondant because that's the easiest thing to do. But now I look back and I go, well, you couldn't pay me to do a cake with fondant anymore because it's just not my style. And I feel like that's the sort of thing that you learn over the years is that even though trends, and I think this really applies to kind of any type of industry, it's kind of like there's obviously this like certain theme, this overall theme or like style of doing something. And then you decide that you're like, I could offer that, but I don't really like, I'm not, doesn't make me happy. So I'm not going to do those anymore. Like, so over the years, it's kind of changed because now I don't do, well, I try to like do things in the way that I would like to do them, of course, but I used to do cakes that were, like if you wanted an Elmo cake, I'd be like, sure, I'll make you an Elmo cake. But now if somebody asked me to do that, I'd say, no, it's just really not my style anymore. And I think that's kind of like when you start to fine tune what your passions are. And I think your passions really do translate into the work you do. Because if somebody was asking you to podcast about like, I don't know, something that's like way off base,
Yeah.
right? But they're like, oh, it's a great opportunity, or it'll pay you really well if you, talk to, I have no idea, insert somebody here that's like super uninteresting, right? And you're kind of like, well, yeah, I guess I could do it and it pays really well, but it's like, I am not going to be invested in this conversation at all. Like I have no interest in what this person has to say. Right. So it's like, obviously you've kind of aligned yourself to the things that you are passionate about talking about and like things that you want to put out in the universe. So same thing with my baking. It's kind of like, well, now I don't do character cakes. And I used to be afraid to say that. I'd be like, okay, I'll take it all because, I don't want to turn people down, or I don't want to turn people away, or I don't want people going to other people. And now it's just kind of like, no, you know what? If you want an Elmo cake, I can't do it, but I know actually like 5 other bakers who are amazing at making like 3D realistic, cakes. And I would more than like happily refer you to these people than take on the work myself, knowing that I'm not passionate about it. I probably won't do a good job on it because I'm just not good at it. And B, I don't need to, add unnecessary stress to my own life, knowing that I've taken on work that doesn't make me happy. Right. And there always has to be a balance, right? Like I can't be, arrogant and be like, well, I only do a certain style, if nobody's asking for it, obviously. So it's about, it's a bit of a, you have to navigate through those waters, if you will. But now I say things like, if you go into my contact form, it specifically says like, I don't replicate other people's work because I feel like that's their artistry, that's their work, but I can be inspired by them or like understand the color scheme or the theme of your birthday party. But what you will get is my interpretation of that, as opposed to, oh, here's a picture from Pinterest. Can you just copy that? And that's how it started, is like, really drawing inspiration, but then really kind of honing in on that style, and doing the things that you love, because then it's not about competition. It's not about what other people are doing. It's going, you know what? People are coming to me because they want the cake mama, like a cake from the cake mama. Maybe it's because they've got dietary restrictions and they can't have egg and dairy. And so now they've got somebody who can make pretty cakes that don't have egg and dairy in them. Or we really like her cookie style, so we want her to do cookies for our birthday celebration, or whatever it may look like. And then, like I said, if somebody's looking for something super extravagant, I'm like, you know what, this is who you guys should go to for that, because they will do an amazing job and they will love it. They will love what you're asking of them. And that to me is the ultimate thing. Like that's what you want, is for people to be either sent to you because they know that you're the expert in that field, and then vice versa, you're sending people out to others, and not worried about what other people are doing, because you're sending them to, that you're sending that client to somebody who's good at what they do. And I always just feel like that's just good karma at the end of the day, right? It's like you just put out good things in the world and good things come back to you, and setting aside that ego, right, which I feel like sometimes is a defense mechanism, right? It's the way to keep yourself feeling really like up here, even though sometimes you're feeling like this. But it is about setting that aside and just focusing on what's really true to you, and putting that out in the world, because that always comes back tenfold, I feel, as opposed to the other way. The other way just doesn't really get you anywhere, I don't think.
Yeah. Yeah, I completely agree. And you, when you were saying someone to interview that would be completely off topic. I was thinking of Donald Trump, but then I was like, I would want to interview him because I want to know why he does what he does.
Right? I feel like that would, I think, you're probably be through the roof with an interview like that, just because I feel like people just want to watch, like they'd want to, they'd be bringing the popcorn to like watch that unfold, right? So, but you know what
Yeah,
I, but yeah, that being said, it's like, that, there's always two sides of that, right? It's like you're either doing it purely for the money, um, or purely because you just don't want to let it go, right? Like
yeah.
that's usually,
I
otherwise
think,
you will just let it go.
yeah, and I think that's so true. In spending time to understand yourself first and connecting with yourself, like what brings you pure happiness. Because if you were to start this business and go on this journey of being an entrepreneur, but doing things you didn't love, then it kind of, to me, in my opinion, it's no different than having a job that you don't love, right? And but when you're creating a job for yourself and then you also don't like it, then you have to ask yourself, what is it? And where is my passion, and why? How can I do more of that and less of this? And I love that you share that you've now created a list of people that can do those things that you don't want to do, but that they can do it really well. And and it does, and like you said, it does really, like, from a consumer side, like for myself, if I was to ask for a cake for my daughter, that really helps me because planning my daughter's first birthday was tough, trying to find, there are a lot of people that do cakes in the lower mainland, but then there's also not a lot of people that do cakes in the lower mainland, I found. Like, and
Right.
a lot of people were booked or couldn't do it, or and it was hard to figure out who to go to and who to trust. And I think going to you and having you redirect people is a big help. And and I would have loved that for myself. But and I think you're right that's a difference, that makes a difference in who you are as a person and how people can understand how you work in your business, and what they can expect from you when they do go with you. And I love that the collaboration and the sharing and the referring to people is a real part of you and your business and your brand. And I love that. And I think that really shows in how much people love you and all the work that you do and all the success you've had.
It's definitely been an interesting journey, and I think above all things, it's really going back to that authenticity. And it's funny because I was actually chatting about this with with my laser hair lady, my lovely friend Karen. We were talking about that. We were just talking about everything else kind of falls into place when people know who you are as a person, right? And when you are, and that's not saying you have to like be on social media and be like, let me talk to you about like the hard time that I'm going through. It's not, you don't necessarily have to be super vulnerable all the time. Although sometimes it's, people find it a little bit refreshing when you just kind of say, hey, I'm not having a great day. And, that's real life, or things are not as perfect as they seem. But I think it really always, it boils down to, being true to yourself and being true, when it comes to like you say, supporting your community, referring people to things that you love, or when businesses reach out, like especially for me, when businesses reach out and say, hey, like, do you want to try this, can you share this? It's like I'm always very open and honest about that. And I do it because I want to make sure that whenever I share things, like I don't want to ever come off as being super salesy, like, hey, like this, and things like that, because that is everywhere. It's everywhere. I get sucked into like all of the, and I've shared this a lot of times. I get sucked into all of the Instagram story ads. Like I feel like everybody is trying to sell something on the internet.
Yeah.
So it's like at the end of the day, it's like, and that's why I share a lot of my life through my Cake Mama account, because like I want people to know who I am, like who my family is, how we are, like just in the everyday realm. Because I feel like that really builds brand trust. And I feel like that translate, like the number of people who've just said, hey, like I've seen your work everywhere, like I would love it if you would do something for me, or I really enjoyed your your Instagram stories or your Q&A or your live or whatever it is, like are you available to do a cookie order for me? Like that's really touching to me, because it's like I've made a connection, or if I've had a DM conversation with somebody, like that to me is a connection. That's like, for me, is what like makes me thrive, is knowing that there is this community that likes to have a conversation. Like, I clearly am a very chatty person. So I like talking to people. I like connecting with people. And if that turns into, hey, like I have a birthday party coming up, can we work together? It's like, heck yeah, like absolutely. But it's like, now me, like the person behind the business. And like,
Yeah.
I always feel like whenever I see that in other businesses, like I always want to emulate that, because that always endears me to other businesses when I kind of see, you know, the things that they're going through, how they do what they do, if they're sharing processes or just sharing that they're at the beach with their family or whatever that looks like outside of like the actual business. I'm always just like, yeah, like that just seems like a really neat person. Like I'd love to support them. And that's kind of always in my head when it comes to, sharing to my community, is just knowing that, or having people, or I guess my hope is that people know that I share just truly out of the love of sharing, and it's not really out of a need to sell or of a need to profit. It's really just building that community, because I always feel like those are the ones that are going to say, if and when, let's manifest this, guys. If and when that cookbook comes out, if I have a bunch of people that are going to be like, yes, she did it, that's going to be super cool, right? Like, bringing everybody along with me on that journey of what that looks like if and whenever that ever happens. Like, I feel like that's so important, because I feel like then it's like everybody gets a piece of that victory at the end. It's not just my victory, it's everybody's victory, right? And it just, even things like processes of when I do a really cool cookie order, and it's like I take you along with the decorating or the thought process of that. It's really just kind of like, this is, come inside my head for a minute, and let's go through this together. And it's awesome when people are like, oh my gosh, your Instagram stories on decorating cookies is so therapeutic. I'm like, that's so cool. Like, it's cool to know that I'm, putting somebody in a relaxing state, watching me decorate cookies, right? Like it's very cool. And I that's just truly, like, in the social media space and that digital space, is like, that is definitely what I'm striving for there. It's not just about like, hey, buy my cookies or order a cake for me, or buy these earrings, or I don't know, like, it's not about that. It's really truly about just showing up, and, being, maybe some positivity, or just maybe some real talk, or just maybe being somebody to listen if somebody's having a not so good day. It's just kind of like what I've sort of created that space for. And it's a lot of fun, for sure. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, I'll say your stories are therapeutic, and I thought make it look so easy, when you do the swivel board and you do the icing, and everything just looks so easy and quick. I mean, I know it's on super Zoom, but it looks so quick, and it inspired me to create my daughter's cake smash in last November. And it was the hardest thing I've ever had to do. And all it was, like, this tiny little like cake, and I bought a little 4-inch cake pan, and it was so little. And I bought a swivel board, and I bought the little base that you put the cake on, and I created, I made 3 layers, and I had all the icing and everything. And then when I started doing I thought you just put the icing, you just start spinning, and it just does its thing. And it was just like the cake started falling apart, and I was like, this is horrible.
Oh, you poor thing! You should have sent me a message. I would have talked you through it.
And then I even tried to like be so, like, my husband was laughing at me because he's like, who do you think you are? But I was trying to like do the knife where you cut it so it's like the layers are all the same.
Oh yeah.
But they were all wrong, and the cake fell apart, and I just went to Safeway and just bought something.
When in doubt, you stick that sucker in the fridge. Just, what?
Okay.
You layer, like, put your filling in, stack it, touch, like, arrange it how, like, still with no icing on it. Arrange it so that it's all like level. Like, it's never going to be perfect, but at least it's like standing straight, right? And then you refrigerate that guy, like, refrigerate like half an hour to an hour, so that icing, the cake gets cold and the icing gets cold on the inside. Because then when you decorate the outside, it's not going to be like.
Oh yeah, I was like taking off chunks of the cake and like it's coming with me, and then my mom came over and was like, is this a cookies and cream cake? And I was like, no, Mom, it's just supposed to be a chocolate cake with white icing.
You're like, that's awesome.
It was so bad.
Thanks for the support there.
And my mom's a chef and a baker, and she was just, I told her I don't want her help and I wanted to do it on my own. And She looked at my daughter and said, next year I'll make your cake.
Oh my God. I was just going to say, like, why didn't you just ask her to do it? But I totally get it. Everybody wants to make their children's cakes. And I am here. I'm totally here for that. I am like here to be people's support. Like I had all, just like I want to say like 2 weeks ago, and she was like, okay, I'm preparing this cake and it's going to be like 36 degrees. Like, how do I make it so this cake doesn't melt? And I literally like over the 3 days that she was like preparing, we're literally like, I'm like, okay, this is what you got to do. Like, you just have to just keep it in the fridge. Like, I know your brain is saying like, don't put it in the fridge, but I'm like, you just have to, because it's got to stay cold.
Yeah.
And it turned out really great. It was a success. So that was good. But yeah, I totally, and that's the thing, like, that's what I admire so much. And that's why I share a lot I share as much as I do, in terms of like process and stuff like that, because I think everybody wants to learn how to decorate a cake, and it's not as daunting as it seems. And obviously for me, it's like, I could probably finish a cake from start. If I was like really focused, I could probably finish a cake in like an hour and a half decorating and whatnot. But obviously I've got like you said, like I've got like 14 years of experience behind me now. So, but I totally admire when I see people like, I'm going to bake this cake, or I'm going to try this recipe and I'm going to bake it. And I'm like, that's awesome. Like, like I said, I'm a lifelong learner. So when I hear people wanting to learn to do stuff, like, I'm just here to cheer you on for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm going to ask my mom or outsource it or get something from you from now on, because that was too much stress for me. I feel like I did spend 3 days on that little cake.
Did you?
I spent 3 solid days, and it was just at the end. Actually, I didn't actually end up throwing it away. I did buy another cake as a backup. This on the second day, because I didn't think there was any hope. But then I just kept going, and it ended up turning into like this big cake, just because there was so much icing. There was more icing in the cake, so I didn't serve it. But everybody was impressed by it, and they thought it looked good enough. And so I was happy, but I did not serve it because people are just eating icing at that point.
You need to send me a picture of this cake. Like, I need to know what it looks like now.
I'll send it to you. Yeah, I didn't trust myself, so I bought the icing from the store as opposed to making it myself, because I was like, I don't trust myself doing any of that kind of stuff. I'll bake the cake and that's good enough. But
that's awesome. It's A for effort right there.
Yeah, it was hard. I have a lot of respect for you and for anyone that does, creative work, because I'm not creative, and I'm not able to work with my hands because I just don't have the patience for it. But I think that after that experience, I was like, hats off to everyone that bakes, and does this work, because it's hard work.
It's a lot of work for sure. It's a lot of work, and when you refine your skills, when you practice, and this is what I always say, because I teach workshops as well, particularly cookie decorating workshops. So when I teach those, I'm like, you just have to keep practicing. Like, a lot of people come into the class and they're like, okay, my cookies are not going to look like yours. Let's just put that out there right now. And I'm like, you guys are always so hard on yourselves. And they're like, oh, you know what? I just won't bring this one home, or you know what? I'll just eat this one on the way home so nobody has to see how ugly it is. And but at the end of the day, I look at these cookies and I'm just like, you guys did this, like, you decorated this, and they, there's this newfound confidence, and I'm like, okay, but now you have to practice. You can't just take something that you've learned and then never apply it ever again, because then you're never going to get better at it. And
Sure.
I've seen people who've taken a couple of my workshops turn around and start side businesses themselves, which I'm just like, that is amazing. And you can see through their work that they just keep getting better and better and better. And they even now can look at, a day one photo and 6 months from now, even if you can believe it. And they're like rock stars. Are amazing. So, it's doable, but it is a lot of work. It's a lot of patience. But of course, if you're passionate about something, you'll just keep doing it until you become your own expert. Right.
Yeah. Awesome. That actually answered the next question I had, which was, what tip do you want to give to anybody that's looking to start a journey into creating their own business, whether that be cake or cookie decorating or just anything in the world of entrepreneurship? And that answered some of it, but is there any other tips you would like to share or advice?
Yeah, absolutely. I would definitely say, if there is something that you're passionate about that is outside of the 9 to 5 realm, whether it be a corporate job, maybe it's something creative, or maybe it's something, on the consulting side or digital side or whatever it is. If it's something that you're truly passionate about, like, you really have to chase it. Like, don't, like, the only thing that will ever come out of not pursuing something is the regret of not pursuing it, right? You're always, it's always that thing where it's like, even, oh man, I should have bought those shoes before they sold out, right? Like, there's always that, like, I should have. And especially if it's something you're passionate about, like I said, I didn't know I was passionate about this until, like, I started doing it, which is bizarre, but, like, here I am, doing it and teaching it and all those kinds of things. So I think it's like, if it's something you're truly passionate about, you need to just sit down and go, okay, well, how can I actually monetize this? Like, how could this translate into something, and then look at people who inspire you. Cause that's what I did. I mean, there weren't very many in 2006 on the internet. Like, Facebook, I think, just started to become a thing back then. I don't even think YouTube was around. So it's like, I feel like an old fart, seriously. But anyways,
don't worry.
so,
I
like,
remember when Facebook was, you had to be invited to.
Yeah, right.
I remember that.
Right. So it's like, like, the amount of, like, sharing now is insane. Like, it's so crazy, which is so fantastic. So yeah, it's like, really think about, and then look at other people that do what you're interested in doing, and, be inspired by them, but don't try to replicate, like, be your, there's space for everyone. But you just literally have to find out where you fit into that little niche or whatever that is. And really, like, make it happen. Do it. Maybe you want to get into something, and, like, and this is how I started, is like, I literally reached out to people that I would love to work with and say, hey, I would love to make cake and cookies for you, because I knew that the return of investment would be the free advertising, or, like, the, the promotion or the exposure. So, and that was, like, when I was just really, not, I don't want to say, like, back in 2006, but more like 2010-ish, is kind of like when I really started to be active on social media and stuff like that. So now, talking in this day and age, you can literally reach out to anyone. And never be afraid to reach out to anyone. Reach out to anyone and everyone, because the worst you can hear is the word no, and you already feel like the answer is no. So when it's a yes, it's amazing, obviously. So, ask people, reach out to people, ask if people will, like, mentor you in that space, whatever that looks like. Because there's always going to be somebody who is willing to give you the information that you're looking for, or direct you to the information that you're looking for. And just don't ever give up. And I always think that it's funny. I'm always finding it funny that I'm saying those words myself, because I don't know how many times I always think, like, I feel like giving up. But the reality is like, don't ever give up, because what you want, or what you're fearful of, everything you want is on the other side of that. And you just have to work through it, and just work through it in a very slow and steady pace. And it may take off super quickly, like I've seen it happen to a lot of people, or it may be a slow and steady path, because, you need to navigate a 9 to 5 job and work this side hustle at the same time. But you're never going to know if it's going to be good if you don't try. So you have to start, and you just have to keep pushing through, and, and not seeing all the no's as a failure, and I think that happens a lot. And I know that it's happened a lot in my career, is that, there was a lot of no's, or maybe not right now, but that shouldn't discourage you from keeping on that path. You just have to keep going. And I think that's my overall message, is to people who want to start. It's just start, and, connect with people, create your community, whether or not that's just your family and friends to begin with, whether or not it's, fellow business owners that or there's so many of them now. Like, I think it's so awesome that there's this amazing community of people who are just really looking to lift everybody up. So it's like, do it, and just keep going down that path. And then you'll stumble, and you'll navigate, and and then suddenly you're just like, holy cow, I can't believe it's been a year and I'm doing this. This is amazing. So it's just starting. That's the biggest thing. And just not getting off that path, no matter how discouraged you get. And starting small too. You don't need, like, I literally, even to this day, I'm still using my IKEA Lazy Susan as a swivel. Like, I don't even have a professional, actually I do, but I don't really like it that much. I don't use my professional cake swivel for, doing my turns. When you see my videos, it's my IKEA Lazy Susan. So, I started with, not very many expensive tools, and I still don't use those very expensive tools. And here I am, however many years later, and I'm busy, and I'm still using my IKEA Lazy Susan from like 6 years ago. No, not even longer than that. I was using it as a Lazy Susan back 14 years ago to like put my condiments on, and then it turned into my cookie swivel or cake swivel, and now it's the thing I've been using ever since. Even though I have an expensive swivel, I just prefer that one. So it just goes to show you don't need all the fancy things to do all the things. You just need the things. You just need the things, whatever that might look like for your business.
Yeah, I completely agree. And yeah, like you said, the worst thing that can happen is somebody says no, but then sometimes people say yes. And for myself, I was asking, like, how do you, like, my friends actually, they're like, how do you find your guests? Like, how do you find all these people? And I'm like, oh, I just follow them on, Instagram, or I know their story, or I've connected with them somehow, and I just cold message them, and they're just shocked. They just look at me like wide-eyed, like, what do you mean you just cold messaged them? And they responded, and I was like, yes. And then they were like, well, didn't they think that you were creepy? And I was like, no. I was like, because I have my Instagram, and they can go and look at my Instagram, and they have theirs, or they have my email or my website or their website. And I said, so get to know people. And they were just shocked, because that just seems like something that, people are afraid to do.
Totally.
And it's so true that, everything you want is on the other side of fear. So if you just pretend like there's nothing to be afraid of, and you just go forward with it, you will achieve those dreams and create that life for yourself. And like you said, a year later, you'll be like, wow, I can't believe I'm doing this, and I can't believe I've created this for myself. And
Yeah.
and I feel like that you just said exactly the advice you gave was exactly what I did as well. Just start small, don't spend a lot of money. Just and I was mentioning to you at the beginning of this about how this is like a corner of my house, and I haven't bought like a backdrop or a lot of expensive stuff, and I just make do with what I have. And it's just, you just got to get through it, because the content is the most important thing. It's not really what you're looking like or what you have in the backdrop, but the content or the products like you have speak for themselves, and everything else doesn't matter as much. So yeah, I've had an amazing time connecting with you and listening to your story, and thank you so much for sharing all the insights, the tips, the advice you have for everybody that's going to get started. I will link Izabela's Instagram and websites on the show notes on the blog, and then you will also see her tagged on Instagram and on Facebook as well. And yes, thank you so much for connecting, and thank you so much for sharing your story.
Thank you so much for having me. It was lovely speaking to you. And yeah, I had a wonderful time.
Awesome. Okay, and if you have any questions for Izabela, you can connect with her at the.cake.mama, or you can connect with me and I pass on the message to her. All right, so thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for listening to the end of this episode. I hope that you enjoyed that episode with Izabela, the Cake Mama, and her inspiring story of how she stayed motivated and committed to her dream and her purpose in life, and creating this life that she wished existed for herself and making it a reality. And just as she mentioned, and as I'll mention again, you are in charge of your life. You have the ability to catalyze your life from ordinary to extraordinary. And you just have to connect with yourself. You have to get to know yourself deeper. And you just have to take the steps to action that and make it happen for yourself. If you have any questions, or if you want to nominate anyone to be on our podcast, please send me an email, info@howdidyoullearn-to-do-that. I would love if you could please write a review on Apple Podcasts for this episode to let us know what you think and what you think of the podcast. And I would love if you could like and share and subscribe us, and let all your family and your friends know about us, to help us grow and to connect and to continue bringing you these stories. I do have workshops and a course coming up soon. So as I've mentioned before, please sign up to the newsletter list to be the first to know, and you'll get first access to those seats. They will be limited, but you will get access to them if you're on the newsletter list. And if you have any questions, again, reach out. Otherwise, I'll see you next week. Bye.